Selected parts from the book One Life is Not Enough, written by Shri K. Natwar Singh. Part 31. In the Commonwealth Summit held in Melbourne in October 1981, it was decided that the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, would be hosted in India. While not doubting our ability to efficiently organize a summit, Mrs. Gandhi had some doubts about our surpassing the Australians. Within a few days of her return from Melbourne, she began to look for a chief coordinator for CHOGM meeting 1983. I often came to New Delhi for consultations, and on one of my rounds of South Block, I gathered that my name too was doing the rounds. A day before I left for Islamabad, I received a phone call asking me to see the Prime Minister. At the meeting, the Prime Minister came straight to the point. You better pack your bags in Islamabad. You will be in charge of CHOGM 1983. I was not entirely surprised. I thanked her for placing so much confidence in me. It was a great honor. Out came the particulars drip by drip. Madam, I have never organized even a foreign minister level meeting. My only exposure to summitry was when I accompanied you to the Lusaka NAM meeting in 1970 and the Commonwealth Summit in Kingston, Jamaica in 1975. I have been in Pakistan only 2 years. I like the job and have reason to believe that I was not making a hash of it. She helped me out as she continued to sign her files. After I finished, she said without raising her eyes, "Go and see Alexander." End of the meeting. I left Islamabad with regret, giving up perhaps the most exciting and responsible job the Ministry of External Affairs could offer. I was returning to South Block after serving 11 years in Warsaw, London, Lusaka, and Islamabad. A new post was created for me as Chief Coordinator CHOGM 1983. No one had the faintest idea how to run a summit which would bring 45 heads of state, including Queen Elizabeth, to New Delhi. Just as I was beginning to come to grips with planning for the CHOGM, an entirely unexpected situation arose. I had accompanied the Prime Minister to Washington in July 1982. On the return journey, we stopped for 24 hours in Tokyo. G. Parthasarathi and P.C. Alexander were the senior mandarins on the trip. While G. Parthasarathi was unflappable, Alexander was immovable. From these two P's in the Prime Ministerial pod, I learned that the 7th NAM summit could not be held in Baghdad on account of the Iraq-Iran war. President Fidel Castro, the NAM chairman at the time, had asked Indira Gandhi if India would agree to hold the summit in New Delhi in March 1983. My reaction was thanks, but no thanks. NAM summits needed 3 years to plan and prepare. Vigyan Bhavan was not even adequate for Chogam, let alone a NAM summit. On our return to New Delhi, serious deliberations were held to consider Fidel Castro's proposal and it was finally accepted. The Indian Prime Minister would have the unique distinction of presiding over two summits in the same year. My priority was the NAM summit. Once again, the Prime Minister selected me disregarding the advice of her senior advisors. I picked my own team from the Ministry of External Affairs, each one efficient, hardworking, enthusiastic, and entirely dependable. Together, they worked as a homogeneous group and labored beyond the call of duty. Occasionally, minor hitches occurred but were resolved in no time thanks to our team spirit. Then a meteor struck. The Prime Minister sent for me and asked why leaders and their delegations could not be put up in the Asiad village. Not only would that save money, ensuring security would not be a problem either. I was dumbfounded. I thoughtlessly said, "Ma'am, you can't be serious?" It was too late to retract. I had neatly shot myself in the foot. The Prime Minister put aside the papers, took off her spectacles, fixed her eyes on me and said, "Dear Mr. Natwar Singh, I am very serious." Pause. Where do you think the money is coming from? Why can't we do this in an austere way? Having known her for decades, I knew it was perilous to say anything when she was worked up. I kept quiet. She again turned to her files. After a while, I asked if I could have my say. She nodded. I told her of my visit to Baghdad, Belgrade, and Havana to look at the arrangements these countries had made for the NAM summit. We could not do worse than them. My accommodation in Lusaka was nothing to write home about, she told me. Ma'am, New Delhi is not Lusaka. The Jambians did the best they could. You were given a villa, as were the other heads of state. I was with you in Lusaka. All delegates were put up in 5-star hotels, not university hostels. However, there was a point beyond which one could not argue with the Prime Minister. She was not convinced. She decided that a large group, including Rajiv Gandhi, G. Parthasarathi, P.C. Alexander, Jagmohan, the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, and I should visit the Asiad village. On arrival, I observed G. Parthasarathi and P.C. Alexander waiting for Rajiv's comments. Rajiv first had a look at the dining room, which resembled a college canteen, no benches to sit on, and long tables without tablecloths. Rajiv said nothing, and we proceeded to look at the flats for the athletes. There were three small bedrooms with a common bathroom and no telephone. Parthasarathi said that perhaps these could be allotted to foreign ministers. By then, I had had enough. I emphatically told Rajiv that not even first secretaries would be happy with these hostel facilities. How could we expect NAM foreign ministers to share bathrooms? Rajiv saw my point and the absurd idea was dropped. It was probably one of his inexperienced friends who had proposed this silly idea and had then convinced Mrs. Gandhi. We were losing precious time. My neck was on the line, not Parthasarathis or Alexander's. To my horror, no decision was taken about the Asiad. But at this critical stage, fate intervened. The ambassadors of the NAM countries got wind of the Asiad proposal and told my deputy S.K. Lamba that if the rumor about the Asiad was true, then their presidents and prime ministers would not attend the summit. I conveyed this to Rajiv and the prime minister, and to my relief, status quo was restored. A high powered Cuban team arrived in early February 1983 to discuss security matters with our people. The team was led by the Vice President of Cuba, Carlos Rafael Rodriguez. Rodriguez was an intellectual, urbane, and wise, a man of refined temperament and with a subtle sense of humor. It was a pleasure to get to know him. At the end of the session, he said to me, "My dear friend, we are fully satisfied with the progress of the arrangements you have made, and you have done so in record time. Nevertheless, I am concerned about security. I say this as a friend. 9 attempts have been made to assassinate Fidel Castro. All failed. We never let our guard down." I replied rather complacently, "We have no serious concern about security. Nothing untoward is likely to happen. Relax." I told him that the Prime Minister travelled in a car which was followed by a security vehicle. I could observe his skepticism, but he was too sensitive a person to get into an argument. We left it that. 19 months later, Indira Gandhi was assassinated. In 3 months, we had achieved an organizational miracle. Thousands of people had worked long hours without complaining. Recurring administrative creases were ironed out without hurting egos, and mistakes were sorted out without the media getting wind of them. It had been decided that all heads of state and government were to enter the plenary hall in Vigyan Bhavan through the ornamental gate facing Maulana Azad Road. They would be received by the Prime Minister at the gate. A few days before 7 March, I learned that there would be only one entrance for all, including heads of state and government. I called the Prime Minister and requested her to visit Vigyan Bhavan to see for herself the implications of the new decision. She sent for me within a few minutes. "What is bothering you now, Anatwar?" I told her what had been conveyed to me and continued, "Ma'am, have you ever been frisked? Have you ever stood in a queue at NAM summits? For the 10 a.m. opening ceremony, We have asked foreign ministers and delegates to arrive at 7 a.m. The heads arrive between 9:15 and 9:55 a.m. The security outfits will never agree to their kings, presidents, vice presidents, and prime ministers standing in a queue with other delegates. Please come to Vigyan Bhavan and see the security arrangements for yourself. The Prime Minister took one look at the security equipment installed at the entrance and asked sharply, "Who has changed the security arrangements?" I pointed to the man responsible for the fiasco, who was standing next to PC Alexander. Alexander did not dare to overrule him. She gave him a bit of her mind and then decided, "Heads will come via Maulana Azad Road through the ceremonial gate." If I did not have ready access to the Prime Minister, the summit would have begun in chaos and ended in discord. Lighter moments eased my burdens. The Deputy Foreign Minister of North Korea arrived with a large delegation to oversee the arrangements for his great leader's stay in New Delhi. Their demands: King Tu Sung would require an entire hotel for himself and his delegation. No one else should stay there. The road from the hotel to the conference venue should be closed 24 hours before the inauguration. The great leader's delegation would require 8 seats in the plenary hall. Here I stopped His tiresome Excellency and told him that his leader, for whom we had the utmost respect, would be treated like all the other heads of state. No exception would be made. To our great relief, the great leader decided not to come. President Saddam Hussein of Iraq threatened to arrive with a 100-member delegation on a Boeing 747. His bulletproof cars and commandos were to fly in another 747. He did not come, but his vice president did, along with the commandos, and was put up in Hotel Taj Mansingh. The Iraqi commandos tried to throw their weight around, but our commandos soon sorted them out. There were other issues. The Iranians had serious reservations about sitting next to the Iraqis. The Jordanian foreign minister asked if His Majesty could be given a seat away from Iraq and Iran. His Majesty, the King of Nepal, discovered slights where none existed. His courtiers were the bigger nuisance. President Zia-ul-Haq of Pakistan offered namaz 5 times a day, and a special prayer room had to be allotted for this purpose. On 7th March, President Castro inaugurated the 7th Non-Aligned Summit. Never had so many heads of state and government assembled in New Delhi. On that morning, there were no delays, no logistical headaches, no security hassles. As I stood on the dais with Indira Gandhi and Fidel Castro, I felt my spirit soar. How happy my parents would have been. The next day, newspapers round the world had the picture of the three of us on their front page. It was too good to last. Trouble descended on me the same afternoon. It was Satti Lamba who dropped the diplomatic bomb. "Sir, we have a hell of a problem on our hands. Mr. Arafat has just informed us that He was insulted in the morning session by being asked to address the plenary session after the King of Jordan. He intends to leave Delhi at the earliest. I immediately informed the Prime Minister. Fidel Castro would be handing over to her at the beginning of the afternoon session, and it was she who would have to handle the mess. She said she would come to Vigyan Bhavan right away and asked Fidel Castro to join her. Castro called Arafat and asked him to come to Vigyan Bhavan as well. To watch the Cuban leader handle the temperamental Arafat was both a treat and an education. The PLO leader was a prima donna, but Fidel Castro knew Arafat well and his tantrums did not intimidate him. He asked the recalcitrant Arafat if he considered himself a friend of Indira Gandhi. The response was, "Friend? She is my elder sister. I will do anything for her." The Castro coup de grace was then deftly delivered. Then behave like a younger brother and attend this afternoon session. It was over in 2 minutes. Apart from Indira Gandhi, it was Castro who was the star of the summit. Castro had included Nobel laureate Gabriel Garcia Marquez in his delegation. H.Y. Sharad Prasad and I took him to the Prime Minister. She was delighted and he was thrilled. After the summit in India, the non-aligned movement emerged stronger and more united than ever. The Iran-Iraq and Kampuchean disputes which were going on at the time were, after vigorous behind-the-scene confabulations, not permitted to explode. The summit itself concluded on a high note and was, by all standards, a huge success. I was given some credit for that. No civil servant had received such exposure. While my organizational capacities received accolades from unexpected quarters, the one that I have valued most was the letter from Prime Minister wrote to me on 18th March 1983. Unwinding after the NAM summit was out of question, for CHOGM was a few months ahead. On the second day of the CHOGM summit, the Prime Minister asked me to quietly inquire from Rashtrapati Bhavan if the Queen was holding an investiture for Mother Teresa, who was to receive the Order of the Merit there. The military secretary confirmed this news. Not only had the venue been decided, invitations to the event had been sent out on Buckingham Palace stationery. I conveyed this to the Prime Minister, who was not pleased. Meanwhile, Hemavati Nandan Bahuguna, member of the Lok Sabha, had arrived to the Prime Minister saying that the Queen could not hold an investiture at Rashtrapati Bhavan, only the President could. He added that the matter would be raised in the Lok Sabha. Bahuguna was right. The British had perhaps erred in good faith, but the error had to be rectified. It fell to my lot to sort out this unprecedented breach in protocol. Mrs. Gandhi asked me to get in touch with Mrs. Thatcher and get back to her. I asked Robert Wade Gary, the British High Commissioner, to convey to Mrs. Thatcher that the venue for the investiture must be changed. I added that while we held Her Majesty the Queen in high esteem and Mother Teresa was a very special person, we ought to have been consulted on the matter. I also gently reminded him that Her Majesty was not the Queen of India. Within a couple of hours, he rang back to say that Mrs. Thatcher felt it was too late for a change of venue. Not only would the Queen be inconvenienced, the UK media was also aware of the event. Here was high grade protocol dynamite. The dramatis persona consisted of four world famous ladies, two prime ministers, one queen, and the fourth more than a saint. What if the Indian media got scent of this story? I conveyed Mrs. Thatcher's answer to the Prime Minister and could discern a fleeting irritation. After a moment's pause came a masterly googly. Natwar, go back to Mrs. Thatcher and tell her from me that while the Queen can hold the investiture, the matter will be raised in Parliament the next day. Critical references will be made and the Queen's name will be dragged in. It is only fair that the Queen be made aware of this. No investiture was held at Rashtrapati Bhavan. The Queen invited Mother Teresa to tea in the Mughal gardens, where she handed the Order of Merit to the Nobel laureate, who was blissfully unaware of the upheaval she had caused. Thank you for listening. I have been in Pakistan only 2 years. I like the job and have reasons to believe that I was not making a hash of it. Making a hash means to ruin something by making many mistakes. G. Parthasarathi and P.C. Alexander were the senior mandarins on the trip. While G. Parthasarathi was unflappable, Alexander was immovable. Unflappable, UNFLAPPABLE. Unflappable means having or showing calmness in a crisis. From these two P's in the Prime Ministerial pod, I learned that the 7th NAM summit could not be held in Baghdad on account of the Iran-Iraq war. Pod, POD, pod means a shell, a case. I picked my own team from the Ministry of External Affairs, each one efficient, hardworking, enthusiastic, and entirely dependable. Together, they worked as a homogeneous group. HOMOGGNOUS. Homogeneous means same, similar. Having same age and similar experience, etc. The Iran-Iraq and Kampuchean disputes which were going on at the time were, after vigorous behind-the-scene confabulations, not permitted to explode. CONFABULATIONS. Confabulations means conversation or discussion. No investiture was held at Rashtrapati Bhavan. The Queen invited Mother Teresa to tea in the Mughal gardens, where she handed the Order of Merit to the Nobel laureate, who was blissfully aware of the upheaval she had caused. Investiture, INVESTITURE. Investiture means a ceremony at which honors or rank are formally conferred on a particular person. Thank you very much.